Well, there's the first bit of movement on the transfer portal front and a couple of new commitments on the football side. There's a lot that actually happened this weekend. For a weekend when no Pitt teams, when the football team and the basketball team weren't playing any games, there was actually a decent amount of news. So we've got a lot to cover here on our Monday recap. We're going to be talking about football recruiting. We're talking about basketball transfer portal action and everything to get you ready for the week. So let's jump into it. It's the Monday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Monday. It's the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Glad to be with you today. It's Panther-Lair.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. That's where we're doing all of our Pitt coverage, Pitt football, basketball, recruiting. We've got it all covered at Panther-Lair.com. And as we move through this spring and Pitt continues spring camp and the basketball team starts having transfer moves with players leaving and players coming in, the place you want to be to get all the coverage is Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, the message boards is the place where you talk about it. You know, we provide the content and the coverage, and then you guys get in on the conversation on the message boards. I think it's the best online community of Pitt sports fans you're going to find. And they're all right there at Panther-Lair.com talking about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. So make sure you check it out. Panther-Lair.com. All right, let's start on the basketball recruiting or basketball transfer front, I should say. Pitt's first departure for the transfer portal came out last night. I think our friends at the Portal Report reported it first. We later confirmed it. Marlon Barnes Jr. going into the transfer portal. Marlon Barnes joined Pitt as a member of the 2023 recruiting class. He was part of a four-man class, actually, along with Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, and Papa Amadou Conti. So pretty solid class, and I think when you put all four of those guys together, for the longest time, you'll recall, it was just Marlon Barnes, Jalen Lowe, and Bub Carrington, Papa Amadou Conti being sort of a late add to the class. But, I mean, they were all highly rated guys. You know, I'm looking at, our rankings here on 247. We have him as a three-star prospect coming out of high school, a top 10 recruit in the state of Ohio, and a top 100 small forward in the country. But I think there were other recruiting services that had him as a four-star recruit. Ditto for Bub Carrington, ditto for Jalen Lowe, ditto for Papa Amadou Conti. I mean, that was a really good recruiting class. And then in addition to the transfers that came in, Zach Austin and Ishmael Leggett came in from the transfer portal. So you're talking about and Michael Hewitt as well. So they added 7 guys that offseason between recruits and transfers. And, by and large, I'd say they did pretty well with most of those guys. Certainly Austin, Leggett, Carrington, and Lowe have been good players. I mean, whatever you want, we don't need to sidetrack to talk about Jalen Lowe's season any more than we already have, and I'm sure we'll do that again plenty between now and next year. But it was a good recruiting class, one that I think had a lot of promise for the future, and I think people were really excited about seeing what Barnes, Carrington, Lowe, and Conti could do. I think the excitement was probably a little higher for Lowe and Carrington than it was for Marlon Barnes, but I think there was still high expectations. Well, by early November, Pitt announced that Marlon Barnes Jr. was going to redshirt, not necessarily due to injury, but just due to development. And I remember asking somebody, why would you do this? Why would you announce this? And they said basically, the way basketball is, it would take pressure off of him to just get it out there and make the decision ahead of time. Okay, not going to play, just going to redshirt. Don't have to deal with questions all the time. He doesn't have to deal with questions all the time. Hey, why aren't you playing? Why aren't you playing? What's going on? What's going on? Are you hurt? What's happening? No, redshirting for development reasons, and you just let him go, and he did. So coming into this season, it's sort of a question, well, is Marlon Barnes Jr. going to be part of the rotation? Is he going to be a guy who gets out on the court? And the answer was no. Marlon Barnes played in 8 games this season. The season opener against Radford, I think, when he played 3 minutes. The season finale against Boston College, when he made the only field goal of his college career, a 3-point shot. Finishes his career with, I think, about 13 minutes played in 8 games total. Scored 3 points. He had 2 assists, 2 rebounds, 1 turnover, and 4 fouls. And that's Marlon Barnes' Pitt career stat line. And now he'll go into the transfer portal, and we'll see where he ends up. I think he's a quality player. I think he has some usable talents and some marketable skills that should help him land somewhere. I'm not sure if this will be a Nate Santos to Dayton type of situation. I think Santos is probably a little bit of a better player than Barnes. Barnes will probably, I would guess, would go a little bit lower level than that. But hopefully he finds a level that fits and he can have success. And not to get too far, not to get too far off on a rant here, but I think to some extent that's the ideal usage of the transfer portal. One of. I think there's a lot of different ways you can use the transfer portal. There's a lot of different things you could do with it. Obviously, just a disgruntled player who just feels like he should be getting more opportunities than he is, just needs to get out of there. Somebody who just doesn't want to be in the place that he is, so he transfers. Or it could be a guy who maybe is playing above his level and wants to get maybe he's playing in a mid-major and he wants an opportunity to play at a high major. And then there's the guy who maybe is at a high major or even a mid-major, and the reality is they probably should be playing at a lower level. High major should be playing in a mid-major. Mid-major should be playing at a low major, whatever it might be. And I think that's a good use of the portal. Let a guy get to college and you make the decision as a high school recruit, and then you get to college and you find out what it's really like. And for a lot of guys, it still clicks. For a lot of guys, it's still a great fit. But some guys say, you know what? This isn't it. Either the campus or the coaches or the team or just the level of basketball. You know what? I probably need to play at a different level. I think some guys have that eye-opening moment and they go play at a lower level and succeed. You know what I mean? Have success and do well. This past year or 2 years ago, Judson Tallender, the safety from Pitt, transferred to Akron, and he ended up starting like every game and playing a lot. He wasn't going to get that opportunity here. He was a backup, and that was the best he was going to do. So he went and found a place where he could play. And I think that's, I don't want to say a good use of the transfer portal. Who am I to sit here and pass judgment on why anybody decides to transfer? But I think that is, it is a good use of it. Like for players, for kids, for student athletes to have that opportunity to find the right level. And maybe they find out that the level they thought was right is not actually right. So they end up in a place where they probably should have been from the start, but they get that other opportunity and the transfer portal provides it. So good luck to Marlon Barnes. I think you probably, if we had sat down at the end of the season, and I'm sure a lot of people did, and said, okay, who do you think Pitt's probably going to lose to the portal? I mean, most of your conversations are going to center around whether or not you think they're going to keep the key guys. You know what I mean? Whether or not they're going to keep the starters, whether or not they're going to keep the players that you really want them to bring back. And then there's those guys at the end of the bench who really didn't play, and you say, well, probably wouldn't be surprised if he goes. Wouldn't be surprised if he goes. And Marlon Barnes, I think, is probably in that group and made the decision that I think probably a lot of people expected. I can't say I was too surprised when I saw the news come out yesterday that Marlon Barnes was going to go into the transfer portal. So that's the first one. Probably going to be a few more. The big question we're all going to be waiting on is to see how many of those starters, of those contributors, end up going into the portal. It seems like the early reviews or the early feedback is that Pitt might do pretty well with holding on to its key guys. But we'll see. We'll see what the next few weeks brings. But that's Pitt's first departure for the transfer portal. So the Pitt basketball team lost a player yesterday to the portal. The Pitt football team, on the contrary, over the weekend added 2 players to the 2026 recruiting class. They came into Friday with 2 commitments in the class. And by the end of the weekend, they had 2 more commitments. The first commitment came, actually the third commitment in the class, but the first one of the weekend came with Dylan Wester. He's a 5'9", 160-pound receiver out of Booker High School in Sarasota, Florida. Took an unofficial visit to Pitt on Thursday and then made the decision to commit on Friday. Wester caught 37 passes for 675 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. He averaged more than 18 yards per catch. He had an 85-yard kick return touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown. And I said his height and weight, and right off the bat, you probably noticed it. We list him at 5'9", 160. Those are listed heights and listed weights, which are oftentimes a little bit more than what the guy actually is. He's a smaller guy. And when you watch the film, you see it. He's not the biggest wide receiver on the field, but he's pretty darn fast. He might be the fastest player on the field. And if all of this sounds familiar, it's because it should. This is what they've gone after. This is what they've tried to land. It's the recruits that they signed last year at the offensive skill positions. It's the transfers they brought in last year at the offensive skill positions, and it's the guys they're prioritizing and targeting in this 2026 recruiting class at the offensive skill positions. Small but fast. Cade Bell, I think if you asked him, and I don't even think you would need a truth serum, but if you ask Cade Bell, what are your preferences for the skill players? He says, give me the speed first. Give me the speed before even before the size. I think Cade Bell will be perfectly happy with a roster full of 5'9", maybe 5'10" wide receivers if they're all out there running 4.4 or better. Dylan Wester looks like the kind of guy who can get that speed. I mean, when you watch his highlight film, he's just running away from guys. I mean, he is taking off and he is gone. And that's what they want. I mean, that's the kind of player they want. I mean, sure, they'd love to have a guy who's 6'1" and runs a 4.4 or 4.35 or something like that, or a 6'2" receiver or something like that. But if they can't get those guys, and those guys are hard to get, you have to be one of the top schools to get those exceptional sort of freak athlete packages of the guy who's 6'2" and runs a 4.4 or better 40. But failing that, if you have to make concessions on size or speed, Cade Bell is willing to make the concessions on size. He wants the speed. And, it's not the worst plan to try to load up and be the fastest team in the ACC. It's not the worst idea. I mean, speed is speed. It translates. You can't coach it. It's all that stuff. And if you're going to try to, if there's an opportunity with a sort of marketed efficiency, or you find a guy that you think is getting overlooked because they're too small, but they've got that speed, then I think you give them an extra look. And I have to think a lot of eyes in the South Side were opened last season when Desmond Reed showed how well he could play and excel at the ACC level despite being small. I think a lot of people in the South Side and in Pitt's building, on Pitt's coaching staff and around the program, a lot of people were skeptical of Desmond Reed, that didn't think that a guy his size would be able to have that kind of success in the ACC. But what they found out is he can, he did, and he will. And it's because of that speed. Now, I mean, Desmond Reed's a tough little guy too, but he's got that speed. So that fourth down handoff against Cal, where a bigger but maybe slower guy gets a first down and a few more yards, Desmond Reed gets a touchdown out of it. And that's the difference. Like, that's the difference maker right there, is that speed that can turn a 2-yard gain into 8, a 6-yard gain into 24, or if you can get some daylight, 75. And that's what they brought in with the transfers last year, with Raphael Williams and Sincere Lee, smaller, fast guys. Desmond Reed, obviously, like we said. It's what they brought in with their skill position guys this year, like the freshmen, either the guys who were already enrolled or the guys who were coming in the summer. I mean, Bryce Yates, Tony Kinsler, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank on the running back. I know Jalen Brown is coming in, but the running back who's on campus right now, man, why would I forget this? Ja'Kirian Turner, that's it. Or Cam Sapp, who's on campus right now. I mean, like, all these guys. Saquon Smith, smaller, fast guys. They're not all exactly the same size, but they're all smaller, and they've all got speed to burn. And, and that the transfers as well. I mean, Deuce Spann is a bigger guy. Andy Jean has decent size, but that's mostly just compared to the rest of Pitt's receivers, other than Kenny Johnson. Kateris Hicks is a smaller guy. I mean, like, this is what they're going for. And again, I don't, I keep saying this, this is what they want. They want these smaller guys. It's not the worst plan. If you're not going to get the 6'2" guy who runs a 4.4, find another guy who can run that speed, even if you're giving up something in the way of size. And that's what they've got with Dylan Wester. And I think the other receivers and running backs that they've got coming in on official visits and targets that they've got, that's who those guys are. You know what I mean? Like, they're sort of similar in size and skill set. And I don't think it's the worst idea. The other commitment they got, he visited on Saturday, committed on Saturday, made it official with a public announcement, at least on Sunday, is Marcus Jennings. And Marcus Jennings is a little bit bigger. He's a 6'3", 190-pound safety / outside linebacker at Cass Tech, big-time school in Detroit, a school that produces a lot of Division I talent. Terrence Enos, Pitt's offensive lineman, is from Cass Tech. Pitt has tried to get a lot of guys from Cass Tech over the years. They haven't always been successful, but they got they signed Enos a few years ago and got a commitment from Marcus Jennings on Saturday. Then he announced it yesterday. Now, Jennings is a guy who he played corner and safety as a sophomore at Cass Tech. He just keeps growing, so he moved to more of a nickel position at Cass Tech this past season as his junior year. And when you look at how he was playing as a nickel, it reminds you a lot of what the star linebacker does in Pitt's defense. Playing in the middle of the defense, almost a hybrid strong safety outside linebacker position, a little bit of blitzing, a little bit of coverage, all the time run support. And that's what Marcus Jennings was doing there, and that's what he will do at Pitt. He looks a lot like the kinds of guys they've signed in the last few years. Jordan Bass, Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace to a certain extent. Jeremiah Marcelin to a certain extent. These guys, particularly the Biles, Lovelace, Bass class, those guys that were, could have passed for safeties, could have had, could almost were sort of built like safeties a little bit. I remember Rasheem Biles, the big question in his recruitment from other coaching staffs. Pitt was really sold on him from the beginning, but other coaching staffs were not sure because they thought he was either too small to be a linebacker or too slow to be a safety. He looks like he's fast enough and big enough to me, but what do I know? But those kinds of guys, those kinds of athletes, it could be big safeties, but in Pitt's defense, they'll be maybe slightly undersized linebackers. Although even there, Biles is filled out, Lovelace has gotten big. Kyle Lewis is filled in nicely. I mean, so they could be big safeties or moderately, more or less normally sized outside linebackers, but that's what Marcus Jennings is. And you watch his film, I mean, he's the best all-around athlete on the field. Yeah, like when you watch his film, he's between his size and then his athleticism, I don't know if you find a better athlete that you watch as he plays. He's got just a couple of other power conference offers. I think only 2 others. And so but I think that list is probably going to grow. I think Marcus Jennings will be one of these guys that we're sort of keeping an eye on throughout the recruiting process, particularly, as a guy in Detroit. You watch out to see if Michigan or Michigan State gets involved. We saw with Elijah Dotson last year that he ends up going, I think he ended up going to Michigan, committed to Pitt for a long time. Another guy who was a safety, or he was more of like a safety or a corner as opposed to a safety or an outside linebacker. But you always kind of wonder about those kids from Detroit if they get that offer from Michigan or they get that offer from Michigan State, where are they going to end up? What happens? But for now, Jennings is sold on Pitt. He liked what he saw at a Pitt scrimmage on Saturday, which from what we understand was a bit of a defensive show. A bunch of interceptions, a bunch of big-time plays by the defensive backs in particular, not to mention the linebackers, of course. The Sharks out there doing their thing, and I think Marcus Jennings really liked what he saw. Fellow Pitt commit Isaac Patterson, who's a safety prospect, he liked what he saw out of the defense, and Jennings obviously liked it enough that he decided to commit, said, I want to be a part of that. So 4 commitments now for Pitt in the 2026 recruiting class. Jennings and Wester joining Angelo Renda, the quarterback from South Lake Carroll in Texas, and then, like I just mentioned, Isaac Patterson, the safety from, I'm drawing a blank on where Isaac Patterson is from. Oh, Westerville South in Ohio. So he was an interesting guy, too. He's a safety prospect. He averaged almost 20 yards per catch as a wide receiver last year, too, and had a punt return touchdown in addition to all of his defensive exploits. So loading up on athletes on defense, not a bad way to go. It's what Pitt has done. They've tried to do it as long as Narduzzi's been here. They've certainly done it in the last few years, really kind of filled out some big athletes who could play physical on that defense. And it's worked out pretty well, I would say, over the last few years. And Jennings and Patterson, the latest guys to join the group. So 4 commitments so far, kind of filling up in the spring, sort of the way they've done the last couple of years, getting a decent number of spring commitments. They'll get into June, host the official visits, and probably really fill out the class there. So we'll see who shows up for practice today. They are in the South Side this morning for a practice, spring camp practice number 7, I would say. We'll see what Pat Narduzzi has to say about the scrimmage, about the defense's performance, and everything else that stood out to him. We'll have our spring camp report with all the practice observations and videos and photos and all those different things. You can find everything at Panther-Lair.com, and of course our videos will be at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content, and then head over and check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, for all the best Pitt coverage you can find. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. I hope you had a great weekend. Hope your week gets off to a great start today. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.